Hey, what's up, Canada and beyond? We're going to mess around with you guys a little bit here tonight. We're going to play a little camera swap, a little seat swap, musical chairs, and musical roles today. For those of you guys that have been following along for a while, you know that this platform, we're always trying to do something to stay ahead of the insanity. And over the last couple of weeks, you may have noticed a bit of a recurring theme about me bringing some other podcasters, truth tellers, journalists, etc., on the platform to talk about, some of the things that they're dealing with, or the stories that they're following, and the challenges and hurdles that they're having to deal with. And there's a method to all of this madness. I'm finding that a lot of people are just learning about other people that we assume that everybody knows and has heard of. And on that note, I am going to bring on my special guest tonight, somebody that many folks out here are going to be very familiar with, and others across this country and continent are going to go, who the heck is that guy hiding in the shadows back there? Shadoe Davis, welcome to my home for a change.
Well, it's nice to be here, Wayne. Thanks for having me. I'm not used to being on this side of the screen, and I have to say that it makes me very uncomfortable with you being in the driver's seat.
Well, you've gotten to know me a little bit, and in Wayne's world, you never know where things are going to end up. So when you're doing a show and I'm a guest there, you kind of get to lead the way as to where things are going to go. We each of us usually have a not a path, but some things that we want to cover when we're doing a show, and it's always, I find it unnerving too, being on the other side of the chair. So I'm going to enjoy that a little bit with you tonight, because the last little while I've spent an awful lot of time in other people's chairs, and it's interesting that I'm through doing that, I'm reaching so many different communities that didn't know the work that I was doing or what I'm all about. And I'm kind of rehashing that through some of the other guys that are doing some of the same stuff, or the same vein of work like you are.
Well, in all seriousness, I think it's good exercise for us to be on this side of the screen once in a while, so we can put ourselves in the shoes of those that we're interviewing, and just let things take their natural course, right?
It's sometimes different how the same subject from a different entry point changes the entire subject matter that gets covered. So for the people that aren't familiar with Shadoe Davis, you run the Shadoe at Night show. A lot of Canadians are familiar with that over the last year or two, but this isn't a new thing for you. And this is one of the reasons why I'm excited to get you on my show for a change, because this is going to direct some of the questions that you're going to have to field a little bit later on. You've been at this for almost 30 years, right?
Almost 40, actually.
Almost 40.
Yeah, I started on radio in 1982. As a 17-year-old fresh out of high school. I didn't go to any formal radio training. The only actual radio training I had was from a guy I made friends with who worked at one of the AM radio stations that I used to listen to in Winnipeg when I was a teenager. So he invited me into the studio one day when I was 16, I think. He helped me make my first audition tape, which I sent out to a bunch of small radio stations across Canada. And I got my start in a place called Dauphin, Manitoba, population 7,000, the radio station which I'm the voice of today, by the way, which is really crazy. 730 CKDM, the Parkland's favorite, and I just went on my career from there all across the country. Mostly, it was music radio, rock and roll specifically. I did morning shows and afternoon shows for the better part of 35 years, and I was a little bit different when it came to being a rock jock. I was always very politically motivated, right? So you got other guys talking about, hey, what's your favorite movie of all time? I was talking about the problems with Paul Martin or Jean Chrétien or whatever. Oh, Mulrooney won the election last night. Whatever it was, I was talking about that stuff, much to the chagrin of my program directors who said, just keep it light, man. Just keep it light. And then I graduated into talk radio in the last 5-6 years of my career, where I learned a great deal about journalism and newsrooms. And you know, it was interesting, Wayne. I watched as local newsrooms, which were full of life, when I first came into the radio scene. 1982, 1984, I got my start in Winnipeg at a major market with Moffat. So it was CKY, City FM, and there was this newsroom. These are two music radio stations, remember. The newsroom had 14 employees. They had anchors for the morning and the afternoon, reporters, beat reporters, the whole shebang. And I remember working one swing shift late one night, and there was a riot at Stony Mountain Penitentiary, which is about 20 minutes north of the city. And we had this reporter called Erin Brooks, who was just fresh in town. She had no idea how to get there. And she said, will you take me? I have to cover this. And I said, all right, get in the van. I was there all night with all these other journalists covering the CBC. And this is when there was journalists working in corporate media, as opposed to the way it is today. But so, you know, over the years, that dwindled to the point where there was no actual newsroom anymore, nor were there any actual newscasts anymore anywhere to be found on any music radio station, which is the way it is today. It's very disheartening, actually.
There's a couple of things there before we get too far along there that I want to talk about just for a minute. You started in rock radio and taking jabs at politics. The whole point of rock radio in that era was to, you know, put your thumb up against the man, right? Like, I mean, it was all about being the rebel, you know, being anti establishment, not in a negative way, but you know, it was rockers were rebels, and you know, was kind of how
you could say that. But you know, at the same time, the rockers may have been rebels, but corporate radio, as it was becoming, I'm going to say late 80s, early 90s. I mean, the station I was working for at that time was City FM in Winnipeg. It was owned by Moffat, which was then bought by Rogers in a mass sweep. Rogers Radio was starting to get huge across the country at that time. Very corporate, right? So you could play all the screw the man rock and roll you wanted, but when it came to actually going on the radio and talking that way, well, that's different. You don't want to upset any clients. You don't want to upset any politicians. You don't want to upset any people who may be associated with the CRTC, because Rogers may be looking for a new transmitter tower in Alberta. And if one of their announcers in Winnipeg said something untoward about the CRTC, well, then the CRTC is going to take it out on Rogers' request for that new tower in Alberta. So everything became intertwined. And this is where the corporate ideology took over. And so it got to the point where you could never really be that renegade, even though you'd say you were.
Well, and this is the whole point that I'm getting at is you know, you were already trapped in an industry that was already masquerading to compliance to the corporate or the state, however we identify that. So it was already happening back in the 80s. And this is where I think this is interesting, because as a listener, I didn't see that happening from that perspective. As a listener, we were like, oh, yeah, Twisted Sister, Ozzy Osbourne, all of those
Yeah.
things, right?
Yeah.
So we didn't see that aspect of it, that divide already starting to happen. And so I think this is what makes you a bit of an anomaly in this space, is you've seen it go full circle, and you've been identifying it as it's gone full circle. Maybe not consciously, maybe not from the perspective or the lenses that you're doing it now, but you were seeing it back then already.
Yeah.
When did you know that, that the whole thing was off the rails? I mean, I'm sure it was before you actually left, because most of us get sucked into that. We need the job, so we become dependent on it, whatever the case might be, and it's difficult to leave something when we've invested decades into it. So I'm sure you knew it was really broken beforehand. So how long did you kind of try and stick it out, from when you knew that it was really broken, maybe didn't know what you were going to do? Maybe you did know what you were going to do on the other side of that, but
I
take
can make
that
this
time.
I can make this a very short explanation, or I can lengthen it out a little bit. The first inkling I had that radio was screwed was in 1994, again, working at City FM in Winnipeg. And the engineer comes upstairs one day. Great guy. His name is George. And up until that point, we had been playing compact discs and albums. And we played commercials on these things called cartridges. They're 90 seconds, 120. I mean, whatever. So, they would spin themselves around. Easy tapes. You see them on WKRP. And he said, we're bringing a computer in. And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, yeah, you're going to play all your stuff now from the computer. So you're going to play commercials, songs, station IDs, news. Everything is coming from the computer. All you have to do is push this button when you want to start it and push this button when you want to stop it. And I went, well, where's all the records? they were all on one big, huge memory disk in the basement of the radio station. And I went, so can you automate this? He goes, oh yeah, all you got to do is just hit this and it's auto. And I went, oh no, that's it. They're going to start automating. And sure enough, about 6 months after that came the very first automated overnight show. And then a few years later, they started automating certain day parts on the weekend, and they started automating evening shows and midday shows. It's gotten to the point now where in a city like Winnipeg, you have a live, not on all radio stations, with all companies, you've got a live morning show, maybe. Certain stations have a piped in morning show from Toronto or Vancouver. You may or may not have a live afternoon drive home show between 3 and 7 o'clock, but everything else will be automated through a computer. All voices you hear are other announcers from other cities working in the same company who have what we call voice track the shows from there. So there's nothing real, there's nothing local anymore. When I was talking about no local journalism on radio, that's what I meant. Everything is automated and they're all trying to save money. So at that point, back in the early 90s, I knew it was screwed. And the other thing is, while working in Kingston, Ontario in the early 2000s, we had a newsman on my morning show named Tony. And Tony was an actual newsman. He was a character. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he was a great character on our show. He had this great big voice. I'm Tony Orr. That kind of a guy, like your typical newsman sounding guy. And he became a character on the show, but he was a newsman first. And so he had broken a story after about 2 weeks of working behind the scenes on this story about a company in Kingston that had been polluting the lake, because Kingston is right on Lake Ontario, and they'd been pumping millions of gallons of waste into the lake. And so he reported this story once, and the owner of the radio station came screaming into the building and pulled him into his office and said, you will pull that story immediately. I've been working on it for 2 weeks. It's a story. It's factual. It's everything, right? And he was right. But the clients didn't like it. And they were big clients. They were into the radio station for $250,000 a year. And in a city like Kingston, that's a big chunk of change. So he pulled the story. And not only did he pull the story, he made Tony go and apologize to this company, the president of this company, that he was sorry for doing it and that it would never happen again. And I backed him up. I backed up Tony, not the company, not the client. I backed up Tony. It didn't work, but that's when I saw that things were pretty bad. You'd see little things like that every now and again, but nothing to this extent. And it's gotten worse over the years, where you see the radio station doing the company or the client a favor in return for a buy, a bigger buy, or the radio station doing a politician a favor, or like there's a law in Canada that says equal time for political parties during election campaigns. Plus, you can't turn down advertising from a political party in Canada during an election campaign, and you have to give the same amount of advertising at the same rate to all the other registered parties. We would see those rules chipped away at. So the Liberal Party would get more time than the Conservative Party or the NDP or the Greens, and they'd get more primetime advertising. There'd be more morning show ads for the Liberal Party than there would be for the Conservatives. Yeah, they might be getting the same amount of time, maybe, but their shows were all on, or their ads were all on at 10 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock in the morning.
This is the 90s year where that
90s, 2000s, even in the last 7 or 8 years. And so anyway, long story short, as I come out of radio, I got out of it 5 years ago now. It's going to be 5 years, 2017. I decided that was it for me. I could not go back to that. The question was, what was I going to do now? What can my skill set offer? And then live streaming came along, and I decided this was the way for me to go, where I don't have anybody looking over my shoulder telling me what to do. Wayne, I mean, to be completely honest with you, I was always a square peg in a round hole when it came to radio. I mean, I would sit in meetings with these people. They would come up with the stupidest ideas. I mean, there'd be just ridiculous, dumb, stupid promotional ideas. And everybody would get up and go, yeah, that's great. We're going to start that in 2 weeks. We're going to kill it. It's going to be fantastic. And I would sit there and go, are you guys serious? Like, for reals? Like, this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Try and explain it to me logically in 30 seconds, which is about the attention span of any average radio listener. After that, they're not going to care. So if it takes you longer than even 15 seconds, if it takes you longer than that to have to explain a contest, then I'm sorry, but you've lost them. And they're going on and on about this. And to be the guy who stands up in a room filled with 15 people to say this is completely ridiculous, especially with the salesperson who's representing the company who's behind the idea, it takes a little bit of nuts. But I didn't care about that because I call a spade a spade. And that's what got me ousted eventually. I just would not go with the program. So what you're hearing now from all of these radio people, all of these people you're listening to on the radio right now, they're going with the program. And there's two reasons for that. Either they actually believe the program or they just want to keep their jobs. And they'll do anything they can to hold on to their jobs for another 2 weeks, another month, because that's how they're paying the bills. And they don't know what they're going to do if they lose it. I stopped caring about that. And then I started this. And that's my story.
So now you've spent most of your adult working life in that ecosystem, and you're completely on the outside of it. Even if you didn't necessarily fit into it, you must have a a different analysis of how you're seeing them. So I guess my analysis first is they're like not just a plane going down, but the wings have peeled right off, and they are a Scud missile being propelled into the earth at this point. All legacy media, as it was formerly known.
Mm.
Uh, you must have a certain sense of I told you so, or I knew it. How how long do you think they still have left, right, in what they're doing?
5 years ago, I remember standing in line for a cup of coffee with a guy who worked in radio. And he said, 5 years max. That's it. That's all they've got. And I said, I think you're out of your mind. It's still going to be around. It's not going to be as impactful as it is today or as it was 10 years ago or even 20 years ago. And I was right about that. It's always going to be there, I think. And as far as I told you so, I just don't care enough. You know, it's funny. Somebody said to me the other day, I was having a Twitter fight with some global guy. I forget his name. He's the consumer affairs reporter because I had insulted poor Rachel Gilmore by saying that she was inept in a cartoon and ridiculous and an embarrassment to journalism and to global. And she has no business showing her face on any screen if it has anything to do with journalism ever. Because you get frustrated with people like that, right? But so he stood up to her defense like some knight in shining armor. And so he and I got into it. And he said, you're just bitter because Global cut ties with you 5 years ago. And said, dude, I've never been happier. You know, I haven't got any overlords telling me what I can or can't say, unless, of course, it's the Facebook censorship gods or any of the other social media censorship gods. But I don't have to go to weekly ESG meetings any longer. And that started up, seriously, when I was in radio. I remember the last year I was in it, I was working at Chorus in Winnipeg, and I remember them starting up these seminars, weekly seminars about how evil it is to be white, and basically CRT, critical race theory. And it's moved into the ESG. It's moved into gender fluidity, and it just seemed odd to me. I remember the first one. I said, this is mandatory, because the guy was on a computer screen out of Vancouver, and there was like 12 of us in the room watching this thing. And I was looking around the room, and people were like kind of like that, but none of them had the balls to stand up and say, screw this. I got up and I said, I'm sorry, man. This is bullshit. I am out of here. And I left, and I got hauled into the boss's office the next day. And he said, what do you think you're doing? You think you're better than this? I said, as a matter of fact, yes, I do. This is all bullshit. And I'm sorry for saying that word, but it's true. And I told it to him. He goes, you know what? You and your right-wing views. I said,
Whoa.
that's what he said to me. And I said, my right-wing views? I'm talking about simple logic here. No, and I'm not talking about a place where this is radio and we're here to educate people, he said. I said, no, we're here to inform and entertain. That's what we're supposed to be doing, not educating people. If people want education, they can go and take adult remedial nighttime classes in math or language arts, whatever it is they want to do. But certainly we're not going to sit there and teach them the ABCs on my morning radio show. That's absolutely ridiculous. As far as my right-wing views, all I'm looking for is a little bit of logic here. Men are men, women are women. I don't care what your skin color, religion, or sexual preference is, period. And I don't think it needs to be pointed out. Double period. Next.
and you were looking for a job.
No. As a matter of fact, it's funny that, he and I had such an antagonistic relationship, this clown and I, for the last year I was there. Until finally one day, and it was January of, I think, 2018 or 2017. I can't even remember now. And he comes and taps me on the shoulder and he says, can I speak with you? And I said, just give me the folder. Just give me the envelope, man. That's all I need. I will read the envelope. I will consult with my lawyer. If there's a problem, he will get back to you. Okay, here it is. I want you to know that. I said, I don't care what you have to say. And I walked out the door, and it was the best day of my life. I walked out into a minus 35 day in Winnipeg, as it is, generally speaking, in January. And I was elated, Wayne. I was so happy because I'd so miserable there for 2.5 or 3 years. I was so happy. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but at that point, and I had a year to think about it because it was a year payout. But I couldn't have been happier. Actually, yes, I wanted to start a podcast. So I tried that 6 months later, and the company came back to me and they said, well, you're impinging on the contract, no compete clause. I said, what are you talking about? It says other radio stations within the broadcast area of Chorus Winnipeg, not a podcast. And so they actually tried to change the terms of the deal that they had signed with me. And my lawyer took care of that. So that was that. But yeah, then after that, it was just a matter of finding my place in the world, and I found it.
Well,
But
you definitely have. Do you find that it keeps you more grounded in where you're at now, having lived the other side of it, of the because, and I mean, when this is where I mean, we talk about some of the really hard stuff that's going on out there right now that they consider right wing, which by their definition puts us on the enemy camp from their perspective. And so they, whether we want to acknowledge this as an information war or battle, it's irrelevant. That's how they treat us. Do you find that this helps you see through the the hackies and the sackies out there? And I was
I
thinking about that
wonder,
just before the
I
show.
I wonder, because I've always had this rebellious nature, not necessarily without a cause either. I mean, I've always got
You're
a
a critical
reason.
thinker. That doesn't make you a rebel or
No,
or anything.
yeah, but I've always got a reason for my objection to anything, right? I mean, I was always labeled by program directors who in the radio world, they're the guys who run the radio stations, right? Program directors, these days called brand managers or whatever. But they always labeled me as difficult. And I would say, why would you say that? It's a bad rap on my reputation. They would say, you're just difficult. You're a lot. And I would say, yeah, well, that's what I've always asked questions. I used to get kicked out of history class in school for asking too many questions. The teacher would just get too upset with me. And so finally he'd kick me out rather than actually find the answer. But as far as how I look at it today, I look at it as a propaganda machine. That's all it is. Nobody on radio has any integrity left. Look at Charles Adler. I mean, we can bring up a guy like that. Everybody across Canada probably knows or has heard the name Charles Adler before because he had a national radio show, ironically, on Chorus. Charles became, I've known Charles, by the way, since the mid 1980s when he was just a goofy morning news guy as kind of a foil for the morning show host on KY58, right? And he grew into this national news authority, trusted news voice kind of a guy. And Charles, he's an actor, first of all. He's not a newsman. He's an actor. He will play the role that they want him to play in order to garner the most ratings, right? So in the 1990s, when his national news show initially started, he was a right-wing figure, not controversial by any stretch of the imagination. And not far right-wing. He was a conservative. And then he left radio for a time, came back to Chorus, but he came back to it as a left-wing ideologue. And I called him out on it on Twitter several times. I said, Charles, you are contradicting everything you stood for in the 1990s and the early 2000s. Well, people can change their minds. I said, yeah, but generally speaking, by the time you're 40 and you're fully formed in the principles that you live your life by, they're generally all in place at that point, right? I mean, they could change depending on the events of your life and whatnot. Or maybe a tyrannical government gets elected, let's just say, and it moves your thinking a little bit one way or the other. But ultimately speaking, you have got the principles of your life in place, not to be radically changed. And you have 180'd on everything that you stood for 10 years ago. How do you explain that? Block. He just blocked me. And I went, yeah, okay, now we know what's going on here. Chorus merged with Shaw in, I'm going to say 2014. And when that happened, the company moved ideologically to the left. That's what happened.
I would argue that they were already left, but they skated to the far exterior left, and that was about the same time frame, I think. A lot of this, and I didn't know it at the time. I was noticing it, but I didn't notice at the time where this was stemming from. Now I know that this is that ESG compliance and that
Yeah.
ideology that has made its way down from the corporate elite to where we're at. But so we've are now we agree that there is no journalism integrity, morals, or ethical value
Out
left.
the window, gone.
It's completely gone. So one of the things that I'm very cognizant of and talking loudly about is to, in our own daily language, we have to stop referring to them as the news and media, because they are no longer that. They don't exist. That space is. I don't want to say it's void. It's a big black hole, because we're now replacing the entities, collectively as a whole. People like yourself and others that are doing this same thing. We are now the mainstream of news and information, not propaganda and entertainment.
I agree.
And this is where collectively they have none of the tools left within them to be competitive in the truth and information space. So they resort to censorship and abuse and hacking and all
Ad
of the things.
hominem attacks on social media all the time. And to prove a point of what Wayne is saying right now, tonight on my show at 8 o'clock Central, I'm going to run a story that was in global news today. And the headline is I'm sorry, but I laugh at this. And this will back up everything that Wayne and I have said, guys, in the last 10 minutes. COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy associated with increased risk of traffic crashes in Ontario, according to a study. I don't even know what to say about a story like that running on a purported news site, a news network, a journalistic network. I don't know how any of these people can look at themselves in the mirror at all. It's
that
beyond me.
that is truly how fast they got a wheelbarrow full of money over to that fabricator's desk to spin this new science. So we have the speed of science now telling us that
Look, man, I'll tell you
it's
this.
just that absurd.
You know the story I was telling you regarding the client getting that news story spiked from Kingston 15 years ago or so, that one, and then making the news guy apologize to him. I believe that this story that I'm going to present on the show tonight, this is a bought and paid for story, probably from Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, whatever, disguised as a news story. And ironically, there's an amendment. The senators, the Canadian Senate wants to make an amendment on Bill C-11 that says the CBC can no longer run news stories ads disguised as news stories, which is what they've been doing. That's what this is from Global News. They make it look and seem like an actual news story when all that is an ad for vaccine.
Long form marketing.
Yep,
Long form marketing.
That's what it is. And people are fooled. They're going to go, "Oh, really?" And I don't even know if because I haven't read through the whole thing yet, which pharmaceutical company it is, but you can bet that it's one of the biggies.
100%. 100%. So now we're into the heart of what I wanted to hash out with you a little bit here tonight is you, and this is exactly what I was referring to. I asked you if you thought that it gave you an insight into seeing through the gaslighting and the garbage, and you've just given me an example of exactly how that has enabled you to see that. Now you're going to carry it on your show tonight and explain it to the people that follow you in your community. This is exactly the space that we occupy. This is exactly the role that we do. Not a lot of. I don't want to say primarily, because we're oftentimes breaking news stories as well. They shouldn't be breaking stories because typically traditional media should be covering those things, but
Ah,
they
you just called them
absolutely are not.
traditional media. They're not traditional media. They are known on my show as left-wing corporate media, occasionally Marxist corporate media, but definitely not mainstream or heritage or whatever
Well,
you want to call
and that, I'm not. They're not that now. Traditionally, that was their job.
it. Yeah.
And they are so far removed from that. The only place left for people to access any of that kind of stuff is through people like yourself and myself that are now under such a blanket of censorship and being buried. Did you see DuckDuckGo's announcement today that apparently now they will no longer be showing alternative news results in their search engines?
Well, you know what? It's unfortunate because DuckDuckGo had the opportunity to at least rival or start to rival Google
Sure, they did, but
as the
then
Pepsi
they've
to
got so
Google.
much money, they just buy out anybody that comes along with a solution.
Yeah. So no integrity involved there. If the owner of that platform, that search engine, had any integrity, he would be the Pepsi to Google's Coca-Cola, taking a smaller market share, but a definite loyal market share, an active market share, and just sit back on the money that he would earn from that, as opposed to what he did do or she did do, which is take the money from whoever bought them to turn them into another ESG search engine. I mean, I don't know. I was asking on my show the other night, are there any actual search engines that give actual search results for actual search questions without ranking them in any way based upon political bias?
There are a couple that I haven't found issues with as far as for the information. What I do find though is that they're not so user friendly. They don't give you that warm fuzzy feeling when you're using them. Yeah, it's a little more work to use them. There are some out there that are focused on just the information, like Brave, Opera, but you have to, again, they don't make it easy to find these search engines. The last thing Google is going to do is tell you where to go to find anything else that you're going to like better than them. And I've
Well,
seen.
Google, I mean, let's be fair, Wayne. Google does give us that warm and fuzzy as you were talking about. Oh, look at the little polar bear in the logo. That's so cute how they did that on the first day of winter.
It was Google that seeing how Google worked when I had my private self-employed business as a full stack marketing developer. Google was the religion. Everything you did and built was designed around functioning well with Google. Every person's success in the digital space is based on whether Google allows it or not, and it's based on your reliability to their operating systems and what you do, building and using their stuff. And that was for me the big red flag of all of this. So I tend to take a little bit of uh, when we discover or see something or make something happen outside of their echo chambers, and that's what I'm seeing now. When you look through the lenses of things, as you do through you see right through their charades. I kind of do that with developing things. People may not realize that this whole "What's Up Canada" journalist role that I play right now was not where I spent the bulk of my life either, right? So this is something that I've learned and evolved into, and coming from outside of that traditional media box, I'm looking for things different all the time. And just you and I have been working a little bit on this new platform the last 2 weeks since I only brought it to your attention as privately 2 weeks ago. I can tell you right now that in less than a week of being publicly known, we have reached more people than any of my other platforms already, and we have grown a higher subscriber base off of that new platform than off of any other platform I've created in the last 4 years.
Wow.
And all of that is being done outside of Google. They're
Yeah.
not showing it in the results whatsoever. So that tells me how strongly people are moving around outside of these systems to find what they are looking for. And they're looking for people like us to do something that gives them the information that they need.
It's interesting that you say that because, I did look for Looking Glass Media on Google the other day and I couldn't find it. Like you say, it doesn't show up. But you're right. People are now, and this is a big ask for anybody these days because most people will go through Google these days. It's the Kleenex, it's the Xerox, right? Like a search engine using that name is the synonym for all search. I'm just going to Google it, right? Give me a Kleenex. Well, that's a brand name. Give me a tissue is what we should be saying. Are you going to Xerox that? Well, that's a brand name as well. So people will use Google for everything and anything. So if they're looking for Looking Glass Media and they're actually typing the URL into a search bar or their browser, www.lookingglassmedia, so lgm.news, that means they're serious and they're trying to circumvent all the crap that is going to take them to places where they'd rather not be so they can get the news that they really do want to hear. So that's a pretty big accomplishment, Wayne. Congratulations on that.
This is just getting started. We're just working the bugs out of it. Tomorrow, we're going to have a new dashboard for the content creators that's going to make this such an.
Oh, thank you. That's awesome because I was having such trouble. I'm not good with WordPress, man. I suck at it. I got it. I'm
well,
so bad.
The honest to goodness truth, we didn't know. I mean, I felt that people were looking for something like this, that it would be provide a service for people. I didn't realize how badly they wanted it. And one so because since this started and we've launched this, I've had people reach out to me from literally all over the world. I've been offered, and I'm probably going to take them up on this. So if you haven't heard, most people wouldn't have heard this yet, but I'm going to be starting as a host on an American podcast because they are so frustrated that they have to go to the UK to get news about Canada because they don't have access to any truth coming out of Canada.
There is none.
There is none.
There's no truth coming out of Canada unless it's us. And we're all censored. It's funny that you were, Wayne was on my show last Friday night, I think it was. And I was surprised to see that episode has been seen, at least on Facebook, 15,000 times. And on Rumble, it's been seen a few thousand times. On Twitter, it's been seen a couple thousand times. But I've got 45,000 followers on Facebook. And I started this page a couple of years ago thinking, well, not thinking anything about censorship at all. It never occurred to me that it was ever going to be a thing, that censorship was ever going to be a problem anywhere. So I took the page. I think it already probably had an existing 2,000 likes or follows on that page. And that's why I chose to build out that page. Had I known that these censorship problems were going to start happening, I would have done a completely different business plan and not based it on Facebook. So now that I've got 45,000 followers, and last night's show was only seen 6,000 times and actually clicked on 7,500 times by people with a follower base of 45,000. What does that tell you?
And this was the finally the trip point for me, the trigger. I 36,000 followers on my Facebook page, and I did 2 live streams and a couple of article publications in a 24-hour period and had 300 people see my work. I was just so done with this these platforms at this point in time that I was like, okay, whether people are ready for this or not, I'm going to do it because I am literally wasting people's time, bringing them onto my show to give them a voice and to do an interview if nobody on earth is going to see it.
I agree. And it's also designed to discourage people like us, right?
Yeah.
Well, I personally I don't believe that it's Facebook alone either.
No,
I think that there is a lot of government involvement in this. We know that Elon has been releasing the Twitter files in the last couple of weeks, I think, and a lot has come to light there. And we know that the government played a huge role in the censorship, blacklisting, and delisting of several big conservative names in the United States, but he hasn't yet gotten to Canada. People have been going on Twitter and asking, hey, Elon, what happened with Canadian politicians, Canadian voices, Canadian people who were deleted off that platform? And Facebook plays that game that Twitter
100%.
used to play. So even still, I believe that, aside from Facebook's own community standards and their independent fact-checking team, I believe that Canadian government officials have a lot to do with whether our shows get out there or not. And that shouldn't be. And I want to know what the real statistics are.
I
Plus,
100%
and here's
agree.
another one. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I've also got a guy now who is some guy, I think I know who it is, who is making false copyright claims on my shows almost each and every night. This guy says that I'm playing religious hymns that are copywritten, and it gives you the exact time of when this was supposed to have played, which never happened, by the way. But somebody is making fake copyright claims on my shows, trying to get my shows taken down from Facebook, and they're going along with it. So I don't know what to do in that instance. That's crazy talk, but it's happening.
I get the most bizarre things sent to me. People sending me messages. Uh, Apparently, uh, and I know that they're cloning and hacking whatever it is that they're doing. People will send me a message. I thought you were anti-globalist. Why are you pitching me on this globalist investment program, or this socialist program? And I'm like, yeah, that is obviously not me or any of my profiles. And I think a lot of this is I mean, this is a different level than the digital thuggery, the Pantifa, crowd. That this is literally meant to sabotage us as being discreditable, and they are playing all kinds of dark, silent weaponry on us. And I think that people find alternatives, and people are desperate for alternatives. And I was having a conversation with the gentleman that's helping me put this site together, and we were talking about recognizing how desperate people are for alternatives in this is incredibly highlighted by platforms like Signal and Telegram that are literally only Facebook Messenger. That's all they're designed to be, but they are being used to create communities because there are no safe places to develop those communities, as far as most people know. Wimkin is, rapidly becoming one of those, but they've got work to do too. They're still brand new, right? And they're young, but they're people like us that are having to learn and feel and fight their way through these kinds of things till they get to a point where they can breathe enough to do something that sticks. And in our case, this is LGM now, which is attracting people from all over the place, and it's starting to stick. And then we have the ability to develop further. But this is all really super significant. And because it's not just demoralizing, it's not just, uh, keeping us from people from seeing our work. This has a real world knock on effect in that in Canada, people expect news and information to be free. I do too, but it's still not free to generate it. And none of these alternative outlets that do the work to bring the news complain about the work, time, or expense it costs to do the work. But what happens is they depend on people's support. And people are generous to support when they're seeing this stuff. When nobody is seeing this stuff, all of a sudden the support dries up and you can't do anything anymore. Not because you don't want to anymore, but because you've been literally frozen out from reaching anybody. So you don't have the opportunity to grow and develop your platforms.
Well,
And
there's that discouraging thing again, right? They're trying to discourage us from getting the word out there, number one, and thinking that we might have a crack at earning a living from doing what we're doing here. Like all of the other, the thing I find funny when it comes to people in general, and not all people, but some people, as they expect news to be free, and okay, fine, whatever, but they think that we can just go on day to day doing this for free without ever earning any money at all. Never ever holding somebody like Mark Chipman to account, the owner of an NHL franchise, for how much he charges for a single ticket to the game. Well, that seems fair, $200, but Shadoe was asking for $5.49 to see an interview he did with a really cool guest. Wow, that's a ripoff. Like, excuse me, but where's the disconnect here? Right?
Yeah.
Doctors do not do their thing for free. Doctors make money. Lawyers make money. Of course, they have in their hearts they want to do the right thing. That's why they got into the business they're in the first place. Why am I in this business right now, especially? Because I want to engage and inform and get to the heart of the matter and get the word out to as many people as I can. But I got to keep the lights on. That's all I'm saying, right? So if Facebook is not going to allow me to do that, then I'm going to have to find another way to get the word out to as many people as I possibly can, and hopefully keep the lights on at the same time.
Well, and that's exactly the interesting point that we're at a time here where people are obviously making choices. We're seeing where they are going for their information. So the people that are gaining traction and are able to grow this understand as broadcasters that this is a two-way communication medium.
Yes.
And that is incredibly key. And it also has to be a two-way reciprocal relationship with our communities and our audiences. So this is where by doing what we're doing with LGM, it creates an environment that should allow that to thrive once again when it's outside of their control. For people like yourself or Canada Poly, Sean Newman, there isn't the opportunity when we're covering the subjects that you, the people, want to know and hear about. We are going to pay a price for that, and it becomes symbiotic. We need to develop these alternative communities with as much zeal and vigor and support as we do our little food co-ops and our little barter groups and those kinds of things moving forward, because this is what people.
If you let me interrupt for just a second, I'd say this is not a gossip channel either, right? And I think that the bad rap some of us in the independent media have gotten, not necessarily through most of the channels that are out there, but from some, are spouting things that are completely non-factual. Now that is actual misinformation, and in some cases disinformation, the difference being that disinformation is intentional, misinformation is not. So something I learned, and I completely shat all over journalism and radio since the show began, but I did learn some things, Wayne and viewers, from some very, very talented and knowledgeable and experienced people along the way. And one of them is that you have to prove your work, right? You can't just go on and offer opinions willy-nilly based on something that may or may not even exist. So the first thing is, when we say something, we have to make sure that it has absolute basis in reality. It's not just a rumor. It's not just gossip. It is, in fact, a fact. And the reason for that is we build integrity that way. We build trust that way. And if we're not being completely factual with our audiences, and one day somebody calls us out on it and they're right, we're going to lose all of that. We will lose every single bit of cred that we have, not to mention become open targets for the people on the left wing side of things who will call us misinformation purveyors. And guess what? They'll be right. We can't allow that to happen. So I always ask people, Wayne, no matter whose show I'm on, whether it's mine, whether it's yours, whether it's Sean's, anybody else's show I've done in the last couple of years, I say, look, if you're going to put a meme on your Facebook page or on your Twitter account or on your Instagram or whatever, if you're going to put a post up there, from a possibly questionable news source, please make sure that it's based in reality. And how do I do that, you're asking? Well, how do I check? You have to check around. You have to pick up a search engine. You have to check around to see if that story is out there, and if it's out there in the form that you read it in the first place. Not to say that it's the same story that's been used by the AP in different journalistic publications across the world. I'm talking about a news story that has been written about by several different journalists in several different publications all across the world. That's how you'll know.
I was having a, a discussion about this with some American journalists just a couple of weeks ago, and the challenge that we run into now is that typically we would be able to find sources or resources to corroborate the stories that come to us, and I would say probably 85 to 90% of the stories that come to me are dealing with or generated from something to do with the Mockingbird media.
Right.
Now, this is where we run into such a problem, and I think that this extends and is something that's we're not really seeing the cognitive disconnect on the right hand side of the fence or the conservative side of the fence in this as well. Is that so? It's getting harder and harder and harder to corroborate stories because we don't have any traditional media that we can trust. So that makes it a challenge. We know that 90% of the what is comes out across the platforms is bogus lie, right? Sales pitch.
Okay,
Um,
so here is let me go ahead.
I got to finish this because it ties into something else, and we'll get lost coming back to it. We have that same level of holding them to account. We hold ourselves to account in all of that until it's time for them to say something that the community doesn't know the truth on. So, case in point, we all know everything COVID jab da 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 has been a lie. They talk about Putin or Ukraine, and that is gospel.
Right.
And
Right.
so now we are caught in these conundrums of they won't even believe when we have corroborating evidence. We're never going to get corroborating evidence from anybody in the former media zone. So we are constantly dancing around that. Can we corroborate it? Do we dismiss it because we can't corroborate it? Do we add a disclaimer to it? These are some of the things. Now, what I won't necessarily do is I will ask for help from the community if I
Sure.
can't corroborate something.
Yep.
So I think that we have evolved in a position of where us as journalists now engage with the public on a different level in order to obtain those truths, as difficult as they might be. And that is something that is completely devoid in the other side of the spectrum.
I agree, and I'll tell you this. I mean, there was a video that I ran last night of a nurse, and I had it in two different camera angles, and the second one I ran actually showed her, and I was very happy about that because the first one I had lined up didn't. She was not on camera, but the second one she was, and that came from one of my viewers, which I corroborated and found out to be true. The video was recorded by the nurse herself, speaking to the BC Health Board, giving them all manner of facts on what's been going on with the experimental gene therapy jabs over the past couple of years. And I thought that was a tremendous piece of civilian journalism, let's call it, citizen journalism. But 99 times out of 100, what I get in my inbox on a daily basis is, I heard from my cousin's uncle's brother's son who said that he was treated badly in an ER in Steinbach.
Yeah.
And so I say, oh my goodness, how am I going to corroborate this? Is it even worth the trouble? I can't spend my entire day doing that. So let me, in my opinion anyway, let me give you at least two, what I would consider to be very credible sources for news. Number one, in Canada, would be Blacklock's Reporter.
Mhm.
Blacklock's Reporter, to me, has become the journalistic source in the country. They are not right wing, they are not left wing, they are staunchly centrist, they are staunchly journalistic, they are staunchly the news, period. They don't do any editorializing whatsoever. They give you the story. The second one, I would say, which probably leans a little bit more to the right than I would like if we're looking for an actual news publication like the Washington Post used to be, or the New York Times used to be back in the 1970s. And even then, I'm not completely sure. The Epoch Times, or the Epoch Times, if you will. I think that organization is a very good journalistic organization. There's a couple of others, but they lean far more to the right. And then you've got the Gateway Pundits and things like that. But as far as any standard left-wing corporate media, I would love to be able to sit here and say to you that, well, CNN is your trusted news voice. It certainly is not. CTV News is not. You know what? Maybe
None of them, not
CPAC
even Fox.
maybe no, and Fox is hyperbolic, right? The hyperbole you get. Now, having said that, if you watch Tucker Carlson, yes, he does deal in facts, but he also deals in narratives.
Yep.
CPAC in Canada, I've found them to be relatively down the middle when it comes to the interviews they do and the coverage they represent. And the reason for that is they do a lot of live coverage, stuff that cannot be edited to fit a narrative, right? So CPAC might be a go-to for news. If you like, it's also going to bore you to tears. Boring.
When you want to sit through the House of Commons or Parliament and that kind of stuff, yeah,
So
that's
boring.
CPAC is your huckleberry,
Yeah.
for that kind of stuff. But I think that we've entered, where we're at in our expectations or the time that people have and what they're looking for. That kind of medium doesn't provide what people need or want anymore. And there are still people. Do I support the National Post? Not necessarily, but I do love Rex Murphy, right? Right.
There are certain elements of left-wing corporate media that are still like Rex Murphy's old school, man. I mean, you
100%.
can sit, listen, and the guy from the Globe and Mail, Bob Fife, he's pretty good too. Let me ask you a question, Wayne, and this is your show, I know, but I'm going to ask you a question anyway. Was the media always like this, or have they moved to the left? And and when I say always like this, were they always left leaning until Trump started calling them out? Remember when he started saying fake news, fake news, fake news? It was never a thing before Trump actually started calling them out.
So I have kind of a biased opinion about that. Growing up the way I did, where I did in Alberta, through Trudeau Senior, it was very different, and so I got a taste really young of what the Laurentian elite propaganda spin was all about. I was already, had a very inquisitive mind. I was very critical thinking. I'd already been doing interviews and those kinds of things, for different stuff. So I think that they were always that way, but I think they kept people kind of still within that, what I call the satanic lullaby, by having a fair amount of facts, truthful journalism. But I think that that balance primarily came from local content, local news, when it was done in regionally, and you had your 6 o'clock news was national, and your 11 o'clock news was national, but outside of that, everything else was local. When they made that shift to that digital transition, they literally became the one track recording coast to coast, morning, noon, and night. It didn't matter. And anything local, anything relevant, anything real dropped to page 8, kind of priority level. So I think that was took I think it took the hardest turn to being the most obvious in 2016 to 2018. You can still pull up articles, even in Canadian, dinosaur media, that were still active journalism in 2017, 2018. But after that, there is absolutely nothing that is usable as far as for relevance, other than to prove gaslighting or lying. That's every edition.
Remember the Nicholas Sandman story? Of course you do.
Yes.
Uh, when was that? 5 years ago? 4 years ago?
That was Trump's original election, was it not? So that would have been 2016.
So 5, 6 years ago. Nicholas and his buddies are waiting for a bus. I think they're with a Christian school or something, right?
Mhm.
And there's that photo of Sandman looking down at this native, and it made him look terrible. That photo made him look like he was mocking this old native man. And of course, we all know what happened after that. Sandman won what, 3 or 4 different lawsuits against CNN, Washington
More than
Post,
$400 million anyway.
yeah, right. So, but when I first saw that, when I very first saw that story, that was the picture that I saw of that
Mhm.
smug face of Sandman looking down, and I went, "That kid's an asshole." Right. That was my first thought. I went, "Oh man!" And then I read the story, and it was obviously biased towards the old man, the First Nations man, and then the real story started to come out, and that for me at that point was like, I trust nobody anymore.
Same with
N-
Kyle Rittenhouse,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, we see this pattern repeat, 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 and yet we still have a long ways to go in understanding how it is that some items, not a problem, nobody buys it. Other items, holy mackerel.
But you're rightfully calling the media the Mockingbird media. This is absolutely true. Operation Mockingbird never ended, I don't think. I mean, it
No.
was outed in the
Oh.
1970s in Rolling Stone magazine, of all things. I think 1976, 1977. But that was an operation, you guys who don't know about it, an operation of infiltrating the media at the highest levels by the CIA in the 1950s. They turned several network executives. They turned several high profile news commentators, possibly even Walter Cronkite, to pitching their stuff. Or maybe he was just a useful idiot. I don't know. But this has been going on since the 1950s. And that's why I asked you the Trump question, right? 50 or 60 years later, somebody finally comes out. I'm not going to give Trump all the credit for this because I know that the term fake news has been around a lot longer than him, but he actually started calling them out. Fake news
His
next,
mean tweets, yep, yeah, his
right?
infamous mean tweets. It was interesting because I had a long conversation this afternoon about MK Ultra, and you're correct in identifying that happened a long time ago, and you surmise that you don't think it ever stopped. Well, that was the essence of this conversation,
Yeah.
in that we have to start to understand the vernacular of this whole situation, and there's literally an entirely new field of uh, diagnosis starting to evolve itself when it comes to trauma, because now we are starting to see the differences between those that were MK Ultra directly from the handlers within the institutions, and how that progresses and shows itself and presents as trauma and all of these things down the road. But those uh same people, same damages, those same presentations are starting to appear, that can only be defined as MK Ultra damage trauma being created, but it's being done differently. We are all MK Ultra at this point
You're
through these
talking about
devices.
all of the things that we've been subject to in the last 2.5, 3 years now from the government
Everything,
and the media.
even even deeper than that. And this is going back to the 80s already, when you were dealing with that kind of stuff in that media situation already. We were not necessarily seeing or understanding how that experimentation with MK Ultra was being transitioned and weaponized into the systems that we are using today. What I call that satanic lullaby is literally the information that they have learned to how to program entire societies to do things that you got to have Michelle on your show, man.
I was going to say, you're talking to Michelle, weren't you? But
Yeah.
I'll tell you this, and I think we touched on this on my show last week, which I'm going to have to go and get ready for very quickly. And that is that if you say MK Ultra to a regular normie out there, somebody who's not buying it, right? They'll go, "What's that?" So it was a mind control operation that was actually being run in Canada in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and it's possibly still going on today. Oh, that's just fake news. Oh my God, I can't even believe you're saying that. All right, so
I know.
let's go back to a CBC piece by Adrian Clarkson from 1999, which I may run on my show tonight now, of several people who were used as guinea pigs, as subjects in MK Ultra experiments in Montreal. A feature piece on the Fifth Estate on CBC by Adrian Clarkson. So it's amazing how far the media has fallen in this country, that now they would probably tell you that that is absolutely fake and never happened, when the same network saying that today actually did reporting on it 20 years ago.
Not
Interesting,
even
right?
20 years ago, Shadow. I came across an article that was literally done in 2017, 2018 now, that was outlining again how Trudeau Sr. covered up and buried all of that stuff in the 80s when he was prime minister. Justin's father facilitated the government cover up of all of that, and our own, Mockingbird mercenaries did a refresher piece on that as late as 2017 and 2018, identifying that, hey, this is real, this happened, it's still happening. They're not going to make that connection because now they need the whole world to think that we are crazy so that they can lock us up and medicate us so that we stop talking badly or poorly about our
It's
government.
amazing to me, Wayne, how many people don't believe the government would use them as guinea pigs, right? I just can't. My mother told me a story. I've told this story on my show once or twice, and if you have a little bit of time, I'll tell it to you. My mother and your community here, the What's Up Canada community. Thank you for having me on tonight, by the way. My mother, when she was 14, lived in downtown Winnipeg, and she was a big roller skater. So she was walking down. This is 1951, 1952, in that area. She was walking down Portage Avenue with her roller skates over her shoulder with her friend Mabel. And Portage Avenue is the biggest street in Winnipeg, big wide street. And she said a plane flew over them at very low ceiling, like maybe 150, 200, like it was low to the ground. And she said it sprayed some sort of chemical behind them. She got soaked in this chemical, my mom. And she had health problems for the rest of her life. Everything that you could think of, she had. She died at the age of 79. And I never believed her. The first time she told me that story, I said, "Mom, that's ridiculous. Like, really? Come on. You just can't let yourself go there." And then about 2, 3 years ago, I found an article from a woman who's written a book on these experiments that were conducted in two small cities in Alberta and in Winnipeg in the early 1950s and early 1960s by the American government apparently without the knowledge of the Canadian government. And this is exactly what they did. My mom, and it's in the book. I forget the name of the book. I'll have to look it up and forward it to you. But my mom was not lying. It wasn't something she dreamed up either. This was real. She got sprayed by some, I don't know what. Mm-hmm. And her life was never the same after that. So, yeah, That's government running experiments on its own people. So don't think for 1 second that any of what's been going on for the past 2 or 3 years has been for our benefit. It has not been.
Well, I know that you do have a show to get along to, and we could end up in going through all kinds of different things here yet. So
Well,
before
yeah,
I get
that's the
started,
problem being on your show or you being on my show. Before I know it, it's like 2 hours into it and we've only just started.
I know, right? I think we're gonna have to do something on a little bit more regular basis here. I kind of tend to go in spurts with things, kind of get the taste for something, and I've been covering giving shows to the podcasters that I know, but I think that there's something else that is kind of missing from all of this, and maybe it's a weekly weekend late night show over stogies and bourbons.
Wait a minute. What are you going to run into the same problem Jeremy McKenzie had that night when he was drunk the
Well,
campfire? He said something
I
untoward
would
about
like
Pierre
to
Poilievre's
think.
wife, and I don't want to take that chance.
Do you think that you could stoop so low? I think.
Probably not, but you know what? When you're drunk on brandy, who knows what you're going to say?
Well, it's interesting when if people, I've found in my time doing this, the best conversations never make it to a show.
Yeah, I
You
agree.
know, so when we get a chance to do things that aren't structured and just let her buck, I think sometimes that can be some of the most thought provoking conversations, and I think that's something that's really missing from that public space, and maybe we can revive a little bit of that.
It'd be cool too if we could somehow integrate some of our viewership, some of our viewers into the show. Just kind of put them on and have them ask a question. Actually, put them on screen. As you say, this is a two-way medium as opposed to the way it used to be, right? I wonder
It's
if we.
it's it's something that it's doable, but it's one of the things that's a challenge is that almost when you start to do that kind of stuff, you need a producer.
Yeah, you got to have somebody screen that shit.
You do. You have to have somebody that can manage that, get them prepared, let them know what to expect, deal with them in the backstage, whatever medium that they're doing, do an audio check, do a camera check, those kinds of things. But it's almost impossible to do to manage when you're doing a show. Try and watch the comments, those kinds of things, and every time you add another person into it, it becomes even that much more challenging to produce and run your own shows. So we need to find a benefactor that's
Well,
willing to launch a giant media corporation to counter these guys. And
maybe one
get them
day,
down.
Wayne, through the generosity of our viewership, we will be able to hire somebody like that part time. It's
Well,
just a
that's
matter.
goals, right? Goals, goals.
That's right.
So before you run out, what do you got coming up this week? It's still early in the week. I'm sure you're going to have some gold coming. Where tell people where to find you other than lgm.news. They're gonna be getting a lot of that platform over the next little while. The feedback has been amazing. I'm
Excellent.
loving it. So yeah, what do you got coming?
Well, this week there's a woman called Leanne who put a video up. She's from Saskatchewan. She put a
Yes.
video up of her vaccine injury story. She got taken down from Facebook. I'm reaching out to her to see if she will come on the show at some point this week. I want to get Michelle on. Our friend Michelle there, talk about the MK Ultra mind control, talk about all of the trauma that's been induced upon the people of the world in the past couple of years, and if there's a way to get back to what we should be as human beings. So
That's going to be quite a show when you have that one. There's going to be some insights that only she can deliver, and
yeah,
I look forward to that one.
I look forward to that as well. And as for tonight, let's see. New payroll taxes mean Canadians will be losing $300 more next year in their take home pay. That global story I mentioned, by the way, that is going to be coming up. The vaccine hesitancy associated with increased risk of traffic crashes. Only in Ontario, apparently, though, not anywhere else. And there's one story here from the Washington Times, and this is just a bit of what I'm going to be covering tonight. New York has ordered rehiring and back pay for fired unvaccinated workers. Now, something that people don't seem to understand so well, and that is that other court decisions affect possibly your court's decision, uh, whether it's in a different country or not, because judges, like anybody else, are human beings. And these judges are starting to hear now a lot of these court decisions are going another way in the last few months. And they're starting to think, maybe this judicial notice that we've been running with for the past couple of years, that vaccines are absolutely perfect and normal and they work, is not the way to go. Maybe all of these government mandates and restrictions that they've been using as far as their judicial notice in courts in the past couple of years in Canada might be running its course. And I think I'm seeing that now. The more people I talk to who are still fighting these ridiculous COVID mandate tickets that they got a year and a half ago are seemingly seeing their cases thrown out before they ever get a court date. Just tickets gone, squashed. Sorry about your problems. See you later. So they can never fight it.
I think that there's a lot of collateral damage or repercussion that's still yet to come out of what's happening in the States. There's so many things that I wanted to touch on with you tonight that we didn't get to. Like, I wanted to know why you, for all of the good work that you do, why is Manitoba the black hole of information in Canada? Nothing seems to come in or go out of Manitoba. The rest of the country doesn't hear what people are doing in Manitoba, not through a lack of effort on your part, but why there is this big discrepancy in what's out there, even in the alternative space. I wanted to touch on you.
I can answer that question if you want me to answer it.
Sure.
I mean, it's an easy one. It's something that I've faced most of my life being a native Manitoban, is that Manitoba is a forgotten province. And this before COVID or anything like that, people never think about Manitoba. The reason is because it's in the middle, right? So it's not west, it's not east, it's not Ontario, it's in the middle. It's nothing.
You're just watching the slings and arrows go over both directions and going do 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 do.
It used to be even more nothing until the NHL returned to Winnipeg, I think in 2010 or something. So at least now there is some kind of a professional sports presence.
A reason to stop other than just for gas?
Yeah, maybe. But now that the NHL has gone so woke, I don't know if that's going to be the case. I think they're going to lose a lot of people like that. I had a story about that on last night. But yeah, so that's the reason. It's like people just don't care what happens in Manitoba. It's the fifth largest province by population in the country. It's got the seventh largest city in the country, Winnipeg. But
it has the highest concentration of millionaires in the country.
Yeah, but it's old money here. It's not new. It's old. It's been handed down from generation to generation. There's a lot of snobs here. We have got the Canadian Museum for Human Rights that was closed to people who were unvaccinated, of course.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of cool stuff about Winnipeg and about Manitoba, but I just think that in the national consciousness, it doesn't quite register for whatever reason, and that reason would be it's just not really anything. Saskatchewan, yeah. I mean, if you go to Saskatchewan or Alberta, they ask you where you're from. You say, "Well, I'm from Manitoba." They go, "Oh, you're an Easterner." No. I'm a Westerner. No, you're east of me. You're an Easterner. And then out east, they say, "Where?"
Oh, yeah.
They don't know. Especially Toronto, the Golden Horseshoe there. They don't know that Canada continues much further past Mississauga. So
as an Albertan, you're kind of gappers. You're from that gap in the country between Ontario and the West.
Well, we used to call Saskatchewan the Gap, ironically, but now it's Manitoba because Saskatchewan's a have province. They've got all kinds of great natural resources, which they've developed, but Manitoba, for some reason, has yet to do that. So now we're the Gap. I
Well,
guess.
so I mean, we're gonna have fun with this at a later date again. I want to drop one more quick thing on you here and leave the conversation wanting more and people on both sides of the fence. Personally, I am not a huge advocate of Elon Musk, but I do personally, right now at this very moment, think that he is single-handedly taking down the entire corrupt mockingbird mercenary fake legacy media in the United States, and could, if he keeps this up like the 12 days of Christmas, literally ground seed a civil war or an entire recorrection in America. Thoughts?
I think that I watched an interview with him today. It was an hour long, and he was talking about Neuralink, linking people to
Ooh, that's the
computers.
scary side of it.
Yeah, uh, I think that Elon means well, right? He's one of the billionaires. He's one of the elite, but he does not comport himself that way. He seems very much down to earth. A hardworking kind of a guy. I think he's got Asperger's syndrome.
Asperger's and bipolar, if you ask me. You sit down and eat a hot dog with you like you're one of the guys, and the next thing you know, he's talking to somebody in a different code language that's talking about brain transplants
Yeah,
between chimpanzees and budgies.
I don't think that he has any malevolent intentions, but here's the problem when one person has too much power, and that is that person is just a person, and they can be removed, and somebody else will come in and take their spot, and then they will assume all of that power for themselves, maybe in more nefarious ways than the initial person holder of that power would. I think that Elon means well. I think he's largely naive in some areas, but others not at all. I think he knows he's got massive targets on his back from pretty much every other billionaire on the planet. I think he's the last hope, but at the same time, I think he's got the same goals in mind as they do. He just wants to use them in a more benevolent way. I
I think
think
if there's
I don't believe, Wayne, that he is a bad character. I don't think that he's a fan of the Great Reset. I don't think that I mean, why else would he free up Twitter to be a free speech platform?
we don't have time to get into that. I got an answer for that one. We'll save that one for another day.
Well, maybe we'll do a
I
part
think
two
if
later
there's
on.
I think if there's a case for a candidate for anybody being the Antichrist, being loved by everybody, and ultimately leading us down the path, I think it's probably Elon Musk.
You think he's the
And
Trojan horse? Eh? He's the Antichrist again? I've heard
I
that.
think long range. I think long range. He has the potential to be that. But in today, I hope he avoids the Arkansas disease long enough to get the media cleaned up and some people in court and some heads rolling.
Yeah,
So
you see, that's the thing right now. Maybe that's all a distraction. This whole Twitter thing. Maybe it's all a distraction from what his real plans are.
if he wants to make a realistic AI, he is going to need all of the real human data he can get, and he cannot get that from Twitter in its current form.
Well, he has been manipulating the code over there for the last couple of months. I don't
Mhm.
know. He also says that AI is in existence now, and that's Twitter is it, Facebook is it. The phone that you hold in your hand every day is an extension of
Yeah,
you now.
we're just not hardwired yet, is what he says,
Yes,
basically.
exactly. And well, some people actually are with the chips they're doing in Sweden and
Yeah,
Denmark.
yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I gotta run, man. I'm on in a half an hour. So you can find me on Twitter at Shadoe Davis, ShadoeDavis, at Shadoe Davis. I'm also on Rumble. You can look for the Shadoe Davis Show there. Same goes for Facebook. And of course on Looking Glass Media, LGM.news. I am proud to be one of the contributors on that channel. Thank you, Wayne.
Thank you for closing us out with such class and professionalism, and we'll get you
Anytime.
on your show in a That's why we need to do a grumpy old man show.
I'll see you later, brother.
All right, guys. That was so much fun. When you're talking to somebody like Shadoe that lives and swims daily through the same swamp and dregs of nastiness that's out there in the real world, it's kind of like Mark from Canada Poly said the other day, if you can't laugh at it, you'll be crying with it, right? So thanks, guys, for taking the time hanging out with us here tonight. There's going to be more coming. I know that it's a little bit irregular with planning or scheduling shows, not as consistently reliable as Shadow. So you'll probably find me hanging out there in Shadow's show every evening, but or trying to while I'm working. But right now, my priority is obviously getting LGM news launched and working for the content creators. Some of the things we talked about, Shadow and I, are problems that we're solving with that platform by connecting the viewer directly to the content contributor or the content creator, and installing mechanisms that you can support them directly. We're doing a lot of work on that, building new stuff coming, new content creators. I spoke with Mark Friesen last night. He's going to be joining that platform as well. The Grizzly Patriot is going to be there, and also Lieutenant Steve Rogers is going to start using that platform as well. So we're getting quite an A-list of content creators that you guys are going to be able to find in one place at your time and requirement, and not missing notifications anymore. And again, outside of censorship control. So we're working with Jason at Wimkin as well to there, as we were talking about earlier, developing new tools and new platforms. I brought to Jason what we're doing, and he doesn't have his system built to use that yet as the backbone for our video hosting on the LGM platform, but he is going to work on it. So at that point, we'll be able to 100% be outside of censorship reach in North America. So that's the big thing that we're working on. It's, as Shadow said, typically it's a financial issue. We're a victim of our success in that regard as well. If you tuned in early, you heard me telling Shadow about how many people are responding to this platform, which meant that I had to upgrade servers again today. That's like 4 days. We had to upgrade our servers. So anybody that can help out, that is one of the things that you can do down at the bottom there, is buy us a cup of coffee. That helps me out. And to help the platform out, you can donate through e-transfer at whatsupcanada.org. The Buy Me a Coffee program, guys, I wanted to talk about that for just a second. We're plugging that in for all of the content creators. If you're watching Shadow's show, you'll be able to buy Shadow a coffee while you're watching his show. That's one of the things we're building into this platform. So if you don't see it on Shadows yet, today or tomorrow, it's coming. Bear with us, folks. We're working around the clock to make these things happen for everybody. And I think that is most of my housekeeping. I really suck at this part the most in what I do, but it is something that needs to be done. So I'm going to play you guys out with another thing that we're doing to recreate our alternative societies and parallels in this through some merch. And so that also, all of our t-shirts are Canadian made, and again, putting food on the table for another Canadian through doing something that we would be doing anyways. So on that note, I'm going to get out of here so you guys can go and take care of business before Shadow's show. I hope we see you all over there. And if not there, then we will see you on LGM. Stay amazing. Stay Canadian. Together we will make Canada, Canada again. And I'm going to play a 30-second ditty for you guys, and then I'm going to close out with a fan favorite for you all. So I love you all. Stay Canadian, and we'll see you next time.
There's been a lot of talk about protecting our right, the right to keep and bear the arms that we'll need for the fight. And while we've clung to that amendment with all of our might, other rights have been withdrawn. The right to representative democracy is done. It is money that's selecting all the candidates who run. It is money buying policies that impact everyone. And we fell for the con. Tyranny just overthrew ya. Your guns no use 'cause they outdrew ya. But you don't realize it, do ya? The truth is now long gone. Our leaders passing laws that only benefit the rich. They take our last resources with a clever bait and switch. HMOs and banks and corporate CEOs that they enrich. And that's what's going on. Most voters favor tighter regulations on the banks and taxes for the billionaires, but they just say no thanks. 'Cause that of course is socialism. You fill in the banks, but it's you they prey upon. Don't let party platform fool ya. Excuse us for a moment while we school ya. You can't let partisanship rule ya, or the madness will go on and on and on and on. Da 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 da. Our right to privacy is gone. Devices are the spies for government surveillance. Those are now the ears and eyes. They use the corporate data. No subpoenas, no surprise, and still we don't catch on. You can now be fired for expressing what you think, whether you're at work or doing dishes in your sink. Your union cannot help you. They fell prey to doublethink. They lost the marathon. You decide who's gonna rule ya. Look beyond the red and blue to find a way you can cut through the corruption that lives on. You have no right to education if among the poor, and if you try a life of debt is what you have in store. Education is related to the years you are good for, and those years are soon gone. Corporations freely do their business as monopolies. They're poisoning the planet and they do just as they please, destroying the free market while they spread like a disease as they keep marching on. No longer can we just stick to the party politics due to the fact that they are out to screw ya, and that you can count on, count on, count on, count on. Ha, 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 ha. 50 companies provided all the news in 84. Now there's only 6, it's 44 less than it was before. A media consensus now exists for every war, and the wars go on and on. Going on. We can recover from this if we wake up and get smart. It's a long, slow process, but a step is where we start. Let's ignore the menu and start choosing a la carte till the party power is gone. We're the ones who hold the power. This must be our finest hour. We're the ones we must empower, so the truth goes marching